when a raging flood swept away an old German shepherd. Everyone thought he was gone forever, until he was found clinging to debris, refusing to give up. What happened next stunned an entire town. A story of survival, reunion, and a love so powerful it bound strangers together forever. Before we move on, if you're an animal lover, tap subscribe. It's completely free, and every click inspires us to keep sharing the stories that truly touch the heart and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. The rain had started as a soft drizzle, nothing more than a whisper across the rooftops. But within hours, it became relentless, a curtain of water pouring from the sky. The river, usually calm and winding, swelled with a fury no one could contain. Trees bent under the weight of the storm, streets turned to rivers, and the world felt as if it were drowning. And in the middle of it all was Duke. Duke was not a young dog anymore. His muzzle was streaked with silver, his movements slower than they had once been. Time had given him the gentleness of age, but it had also weakened his strength. Still, his heart beat with the loyalty of a lifetime. He had always been by his family's side, guarding their little farmhouse near the river, watching the children grow, keeping vigil by the porch every evening. But tonight, everything had changed. The storm roared through the valley with a power that tore apart what generations had built. The river broke free from its banks, surging into the fields, swallowing fences, barns, and homes. Duke's family shouted his name, their voices thin against the thunder. The children cried out, their hands reaching for him, but in the chaos of rushing water and breaking wood, Duke was swept away. One moment he was on the porch, barking, warning, refusing to move. The next, he was gone, carried by the monstrous current. The water was ice against his old bones, spinning him, dragging him under before spitting him back into the storm-lit night. He coughed, gasped, paddled with all the strength left in his weary frame. His chest burned. His legs screamed. Yet he refused to surrender. He thought of the children, their tear-streaked faces. He thought of the hands that had fed him, the gentle pats that had told him he belonged. He could not let go. Debris rushed past him, broken doors, shattered beams, a farmer's cart overturned by the flood. Duke clawed his way onto a floating plank, nails scraping against the slick wood. The current hurled it downstream, spinning, crashing against obstacles. Duke clung on, trembling, water streaming from his fur, his body shuddering with exhaustion. All around, the night was alive with chaos. Houses half submerged, people shouting from rooftops, cattle lowing in fear. A dog's bark was nothing in the roar of it all. Yet Duke barked anyway, as if declaring to the storm that he would not be forgotten. Lightning split the sky. For an instant, everything was illuminated. The black water, the broken trees, the lonely figure of an old dog clinging to driftwood. Then the darkness swallowed him again. Hours blurred together. Duke drifted, half-conscious, battered by waves and rain. Sometimes he closed his eyes, letting himself drift into memory, the warmth of the fireplace, the laughter of children, the soft call of his name. But every time he felt himself slipping away, a new surge of water would jolt him awake. Survival demanded it. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the river remained wild. Duke's body ached as if every bone had been broken. His paws were raw, his fur plastered tight, but still he clung to life. The debris he rode struck against something, a larger mass of wood that had jammed between two trees. Slowly, painfully, Duke dragged himself onto it. He collapsed, sides heaving, eyes half closed. For a long time, he lay there, too weak to move, listening only to the river's roar. But Duke was not alone. From the distance came the sound of voices. Not his family's. The tones were different, higher, unfamiliar. Children. 3 of them appeared at the riverbank, barefoot, their clothes ragged from the storm. Their eyes widened when they saw the dog sprawled across the wreckage. One of them gasped, pointing. Another shouted, rushing forward despite the mud. Duke stirred, lifting his head. His eyes, clouded with age yet burning with determination, met theirs. The children waded carefully through the shallows, hands outstretched, speaking softly, as if to a frightened animal. Duke wanted to rise, to bark, but his body betrayed him. He could only watch as the smallest of them, a girl no older than 8, placed her hand gently on his soaked fur. For the first time since the flood tore him away, Duke felt warmth. The children spoke rapidly in a language Duke did not understand, but their tone carried no threat, only wonder, only kindness. Together, they tried to coax him from the debris. When he could not move, they did not leave. Instead, they began gathering sticks, tying them together with torn fabric, creating something that floated, a crude raft. With small but determined hands, they slid it into the water, coaxing Duke onto it with soft murmurs. Duke hesitated. He had trusted once, and it had cost him everything. But the girl stroked his muzzle, whispering something in her trembling voice, and his heart remembered. Slowly, painfully, he stepped onto the raft. The children pulled him toward the bank, their bare feet slipping in the mud, their arms straining against the weight of the old dog. Inch by inch, they brought him to solid ground. Duke collapsed once more, head resting on the earth. He had survived the night. He had been found. But as the children huddled around him, shielding him from the wind, Duke's heart ached with questions. Where was his family? Would he ever see them again? And who were these strangers who had pulled him from the jaws of death? The river carried its secrets onward, but Duke's story was far from over. The children led Duke away from the swollen river, their small hands brushing against his damp fur as if reassuring him with every step. His legs trembled under the weight of exhaustion, but he followed because they asked him to, because their presence reminded him of the family he had lost in the flood. The eldest boy, no more than 12, walked ahead, scanning the ruined landscape. The middle child, a boy with sharp eyes, carried a stick across his shoulders as though it were a weapon to protect them. And the youngest, the little girl who had first touched Duke, kept close to his side, murmuring softly every time he stumbled. They led him toward the remnants of a village. The storm had left devastation in its wake. Roofs torn from houses, fields buried in silt, broken carts scattered like forgotten toys. Smoke curled from a distant chimney, but most homes were silent, abandoned to the flood. The children stepped carefully, as if they had already walked this broken world many times. At the edge of the ruins, they stopped before a half-collapsed barn. Its roof sagged, but its walls still stood, offering a fragile shelter. The eldest pushed the door open, guiding Duke inside. The air was damp and musty, but dry straw covered the ground. For Duke, it felt like heaven. He lowered himself onto the straw, his chest heaving, his body too heavy to move any further. The children quickly gathered scraps, an old blanket, a tin bowl they filled with rainwater. The little girl pressed the bowl to his muzzle. Duke sniffed, then drank, the cool water soothing his parched throat. For the first time since the flood, he closed his eyes without fear. The children spoke in hushed tones, their voices bouncing softly off the barn walls. Duke could not understand their words, but he caught their meaning through tone, concern, care, determination. They had found him, and they would not abandon him. As night fell, they huddled together in the barn. The eldest lit a small lantern salvaged from the wreckage, its glow pushing back the darkness. Duke lay nearby, drifting in and out of sleep, his ears twitching at every creak of the storm-tossed world. When nightmares dragged him back to the flood, the roar of the river, the cries of his family, he awoke to the gentle touch of a child's hand resting on his paw. And slowly, he began to trust. The next morning, the children shared what little food they had scavenged. A crust of bread, a bruised apple, a handful of dried beans. They split it between themselves, and to Duke's surprise, they broke off a piece for him too. He ate slowly, grateful beyond measure. Days passed this way. Duke regained strength, though his old bones still ached with every step. The children led him through the ruins, scavenging for supplies. Together they became a small family bound by circumstance, the dog who had lost his home, and the children who had lost almost everything. Duke grew especially close to the little girl. She called him something in her language, a name spoken softly, lovingly. Though he did not know its meaning, he understood the affection behind it. Whenever she laughed, Duke's tail thumped against the ground, as if joy were contagious. Yet even in these moments of warmth, Duke's heart remained restless. At night, when the barn was quiet and the children slept, he would lift his head and gaze toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, his family was searching. Somewhere out there, children were crying his name into the dark. The flood had not only torn apart homes, it had torn apart lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ruined village in gold, a sound broke the fragile peace. Shouts, not the laughter of children, but harsh voices carried by the wind. The eldest child stiffened, motioning for the others to be silent. Duke's ears pricked, his old instincts sparking awake. Figures appeared at the edge of the village, men moving with purpose, their eyes scanning the ruins. Strangers. Their clothes were dry, their boots heavy, their faces set with something that was not kindness. The children froze. The eldest pushed the younger two behind him, his small body shielding them. Duke rose slowly to his feet, his muscles trembling but his heart fierce. He moved forward, planting himself between the children and the strangers. His growl was low, rumbling from deep in his chest. The men drew closer, speaking in rough voices. One of them pointed toward the barn. Another laughed. Their steps quickened. The children clung to Duke's fur, fear plain in their wide eyes. The storm had taken much, but it seemed the danger was not over. Duke braced himself, his old body weary but unyielding. The river had not claimed him. The night had not broken him. And now, whatever these strangers wanted, they would have to go through him first. The children's hands tightened around him. Their trust, their hope, their fragile safety, all of it rested on his shoulders. And as the shadows of the men grew longer across the barn's broken walls, Duke prepared to face a new storm. The men's boots crunched over broken glass and wet earth as they neared the barn. Duke stood firm, lips curled back to reveal worn but still dangerous teeth. His growl deepened, vibrating through the children who clung to him. He might have been old, his body weathered by storms and years, but his spirit had not dimmed. The eldest boy whispered urgently to his siblings, guiding them back toward the far corner of the barn. The little girl whimpered softly, her wide eyes fixed on the strangers. Duke shifted his stance, angling his body to shield her from their view. The first man stopped just a few feet from the doorway. He squinted into the dim interior, his face twisting with disdain when his eyes landed on the children and the dog. "Scavengers," he muttered. His voice was cold, stripped of empathy. Another stepped forward, taller, with sharp eyes that scanned the barn as though weighing what could be taken. He nudged the first man and chuckled. "Look at the mutt. Barely standing. Not worth anything." The little girl stiffened, clutching Duke's fur tighter. Duke answered with a snarl, his body trembling but resolute. The eldest boy found his voice. "Leave us alone," he shouted, though fear wavered in his tone. "We don't have anything." The men laughed. The sound was harsh, echoing cruelly off the barn walls. "Nothing, huh? We'll be the judge of that," one replied, stepping closer. Duke moved forward, hackles raised. Each step felt like fire in his aching joints, but his loyalty drove him on. When the man took another step, Duke lunged, teeth snapping inches from the stranger's boot. The sudden ferocity startled the men, forcing them to halt. "Careful," one muttered. "Even old dogs still bite." For a moment, silence pressed heavy in the barn. The men stared at the trembling but defiant animal, and in Duke's eyes they saw something unyielding, a wolf forged through survival, through floods and loss. It was not the strength of youth, but the fire of love that made him dangerous. Finally, with a scoff, the leader stepped back. "Not worth the trouble. Let's go." Reluctantly, the others followed, casting dark looks over their shoulders as they disappeared into the ruins. Their laughter lingered in the air like smoke. Only when the sound of boots faded did the children release their breath. The eldest boy dropped to his knees beside Duke, wrapping his thin arms around the dog's neck. "You saved us," he whispered. His voice broke with both gratitude and relief. The little girl pressed her cheek to Duke's fur, tears glistening in her eyes. Duke leaned into her, his chest heaving from the effort. Every muscle ached, but he had stood his ground. He had protected them. That night, the children huddled closer than ever around him. Duke kept watch despite his weariness, ears tuned to every rustle of the wind. Though the men had left, the threat of their return hung heavy in the air. In the days that followed, the children grew more cautious. They avoided open paths, moving silently through the ruins when they scavenged. Duke stayed close, guiding them with quiet authority. Though his body was frail, his instincts as a guardian burned strong. One afternoon, while searching near the riverbank, Duke froze. The current was calmer now, but debris still drifted by, remnants of homes, furniture, forgotten belongings. As he stared at the water, a scent hit him like lightning. Home. His nose twitched furiously, his tail rising, his eyes wide with sudden recognition. The familiar smell, faint, almost carried away by the breeze, was unmistakable. It was the scent of his family. Duke whined, pulling forward, dragging the eldest boy toward the river's edge. He sniffed the air desperately, his body quivering with hope. Somewhere nearby, his humans were alive. The children exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't want to lose him, yet they understood. Even without words, they knew what the scent meant to the old dog. The little girl knelt beside him, cupping his grizzled muzzle in her hands. "Go," she whispered softly. "Find them." Her eyes glistened, but her smile was tender. Torn between loyalty to the children and the call of his past, Duke hesitated. His heart ached with the weight of two families, the one who had saved him and the one who had always been his. But the scent grew stronger. His paws moved before he could stop them. With one last look at the children, Duke broke into a weary but determined run along the riverbank. The children followed at a distance, calling after him, their voices fading against the roar of the water. The world blurred around him as he pushed forward, his lungs burning, his legs screaming. Yet hope carried him farther than strength ever could. Each step brought him closer to the truth. And then, through the trees, across the open field, he saw them. Two figures. An elderly man and woman. Their eyes scanning the horizon, their hands clasped tightly as though clinging to each other for strength. Duke skidded to a halt, his breath caught in his throat. His heart thundered, his tail quivered, and a sound escaped him, half bark, half cry. The couple's heads snapped up. Their eyes widened. Their lips parted in disbelief. And in that instant, time stopped. The moment their eyes met, Duke's world tilted. He barked again, his voice cracking with the weight of months of silence and loss. His tail wagged furiously, his entire body trembling with the rush of recognition. He lunged forward, stumbling on weak legs but refusing to stop. The elderly couple gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. Then the woman cried out, her voice breaking. "Duke!" The sound of his name, his true name, split the air like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Duke whined and ran faster, closing the distance until he collided with them in a blur of fur and tears. The man dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around Duke's neck, burying his face in the dog's wet coat. The woman fell beside them, her trembling hands stroking his ears, his muzzle, his back, as though reassuring themselves that he was real. Tears streamed down their wrinkled cheeks, mingling with Duke's rough licks. He whined continuously, his voice cracking like a song of joy and relief. His tail beat wildly against the ground, his body wiggling with childlike glee. "Where were you, boy? Where were you?" the man sobbed, his voice ragged with grief and gratitude. "We thought we'd lost you forever." The woman pressed her forehead to Duke's, her shoulders shaking. "You came back to us," she whispered. "You came home." It was a reunion born from loss and longing, stitched together by the unbreakable bond of love. The children who had followed from the barn stopped at the edge of the field. They watched silently, their faces a mix of awe and sadness. They understood what was happening. Duke had found his family. And though it hurt to let him go, they smiled through their tears, proud to have been part of his journey. The couple noticed them and hurried over, still holding Duke close. The man's voice trembled as he spoke to the eldest boy. "Was it you? Did you save him?" The boy shook his head quickly. "We only found him. He saved us." The man's eyes glistened. He pulled the children into an embrace, tears falling freely. "Then you saved us too. Because without him, our lives would never be whole again." That evening, the couple took Duke home. Their cottage sat on a quiet lane untouched by the flood's worst fury. Its garden was overgrown, its windows dusty, but the moment Duke stepped inside, he froze. His nose twitched, drinking in the scents of home, pipe tobacco, lavender perfume, and the faintest trace of apple pie baked long ago. His tail thumped once, then twice. A soft whimper escaped him. He was home. The couple led him to the fireplace, where a rug lay waiting as if it had never been moved. Duke curled onto it instantly, sighing deeply as though his body recognized what his heart already knew. He pressed his head against the woman's lap, eyes closing in contentment. That night, as the fire crackled and shadows danced across the walls, Duke dreamed. Not of storms or strangers, but of safety, of laughter, of hands that stroked him with endless love. In the weeks that followed, life fell into a gentle rhythm. The couple spoiled him with warm meals, soft beds, and long walks across the meadows. Neighbors stopped by to marvel at his survival, their voices filled with wonder. The old dog washed away in the flood, and he came back. Duke grew stronger. His coat regained its shine, his steps their steadiness. He spent mornings watching the sunrise with the man on the porch, afternoons lying at the woman's feet as she hummed in the kitchen. Every day was a gift, and every moment a treasure. And yet, despite the peace, something lingered. Sometimes, as he lay by the fire, images flickered in his mind. Shadows of another home. A boy's laughter. A name carried on the wind. He would lift his head suddenly, ears pricked, as if listening for echoes of the past. The memories vanished as quickly as they came, leaving only unease. One evening, as he dozed, the memory sharpened, clearer than before. A boy's face, young and bright with joy, arms outstretched, calling a name that pierced through time. Ethan. Duke jerked awake, his heart racing. The name pulsed in his mind, impossible to ignore. He looked toward his elderly humans, their faces kind and gentle. He loved them more than life itself. But deep within, he knew, there was another chapter of his story yet to be told. The next morning, he lingered by the door instead of settling on the rug. He whined softly, pawing at the threshold. The man looked puzzled. "What is it, boy?" The woman's eyes softened with understanding. "He remembers," she whispered. The couple exchanged a glance. Then, with quiet resolve, the man fetched his coat. "If he has someone to find," he said, "then we'll help him." They clipped on his leash, and together they stepped out into the world once more. Duke sniffed the air, searching, his paws carrying him toward the unknown. And deep within his chest, his heart beat with the pull of destiny. Somewhere out there, Ethan was waiting. The town had gathered for what was meant to be a day of remembrance. Families who had lost their homes in the flood stood together on the grassy hill overlooking the river, candles in hand. The mayor had arranged the event as a way to honor both the tragedy and the survival stories that had emerged in its wake. And though the gathering was about people, whispers about the old dog who had been carried away by the water but somehow lived to tell the tale had spread like wildfire. Duke had become a quiet symbol of endurance, the living reminder that even in chaos, hope clings to debris and refuses to drown. Children who had helped him weeks earlier came running, their eyes wide as they spotted him beside Ethan. "Look, it's the river dog," they shouted, drawing attention from the crowd. Ethan, standing with a hand resting lightly on Duke's back, felt the eyes of the town turn toward them. Duke shifted, not used to being the center of attention, but when he looked up at Ethan, his gaze steadied. Ethan gave him the faintest nod, as though to say, "It's all right. We'll face this together." The mayor himself approached, microphone in hand, and asked Ethan if he might bring Duke forward. Reluctantly, Ethan guided the old shepherd to the small stage. The dog's paws clicked against the wood, and the hush of the crowd grew heavy. Everyone stared, at the scars left on Duke's body from the flood, the graying fur that told of his long years, the calm dignity in his eyes despite all he had endured. Ethan crouched beside him, hand never leaving his side. "This dog," the mayor began, "was swept away in the same waters that destroyed homes and claimed lives. He was found clinging to driftwood, refusing to give up. In his survival, we are reminded that life, no matter how fragile, deserves every chance. His words trembled slightly, as though even he was caught by the weight of what Duke represented. The applause began softly, then swelled into a standing ovation. People cried openly. Some knelt down at the edge of the stage, reaching hands out to touch him, as though needing proof that something so strong and steady still walked among them. Duke's ears flicked at the sound, but he didn't cower. Instead, he lifted his head higher, chest rising with quiet pride. For the first time since the river tore him from everything he had known, Duke seemed at peace. After the ceremony, Ethan led him back down the steps, weaving through townsfolk who offered words of gratitude and admiration. "He gives us hope," an older woman said, placing her wrinkled hand against Duke's back. "We needed him," another man whispered. "My son kept asking if the dog in the river was safe. Now I can tell him he is." Ethan thanked them quietly, but inside, he was struck by how Duke, this dog who had lost so much, was giving back more than he could ever know. Later that evening, back at the cottage, Ethan lit the fireplace as the night grew cold. Duke lay curled on the rug, the warmth from the flames glinting across his coat. For a moment, Ethan simply watched him breathe, the rise and fall of his chest steady and sure. A thought pressed into Ethan's heart, unspoken but undeniable. He was meant to survive, not just for himself, but for us. But just as life was settling into calm, the doorbell rang. Startled, Ethan rose, glancing at Duke, who had lifted his head, ears pricked. When Ethan opened the door, a woman stood there, middle-aged, her clothes neat but travel-worn, her eyes brimming with something between hope and disbelief. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. I heard about the dog who was found in the flood. An old German shepherd." Her gaze darted past Ethan into the house. Does he have a scar on his right shoulder?" Ethan's throat tightened. Slowly, he stepped aside, and Duke rose stiffly from the rug. The moment the woman's eyes met the dog's, her hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled instantly. "Duke?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Is it really you?" The dog froze, then took one hesitant step forward. His tail twitched, then wagged with sudden, desperate force. A sound broke from his chest, a deep, keening cry of recognition. The woman fell to her knees, arms open, and Duke pressed himself into her embrace with a force that belied his age. He whimpered, licking her face, pawing at her as though he feared she might vanish if he let go. Ethan stood motionless, heart pounding as the truth settled in. This wasn't just a dog rescued from the flood. This was someone's lost family. The woman held him tightly, sobbing. "I thought I lost you forever. When the waters came, I thought you were gone. I prayed. Every night, I prayed you'd find your way back." The sight was almost too much for Ethan to bear. He turned his face toward the firelight, blinking back tears. All the pieces were falling into place. Duke's survival, his strength, his journey, it had all been leading to this. And yet, even in the joy of reunion, Ethan felt the weight of the coming choice. Would Duke stay with the woman who had searched for him with undying love? Or had his bond with Ethan, forged in fire and water, grown too strong to break? The answer hung heavy in the air, waiting for the final act to decide it. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stood by the doorway, his hand tightening on the frame as he watched Duke press desperately against the woman's chest, his tail a blur of frantic joy. It was as though the old dog had been given back a piece of his heart that the river had nearly stolen forever. The woman wept openly, burying her face in his fur, whispering words Ethan couldn't catch. But he didn't need to. Every tremble of her voice, every sob of relief, spoke of years of love, of loss, and of prayers finally answered. For long minutes, neither of them moved. It was reunion in its purest form. Two souls torn apart by disaster, now stitched back together in the most improbable of ways. Ethan's chest ached at the sight, torn between joy for Duke and a sharp pang of sorrow at the thought of losing him. He had rescued the dog, fed him, nursed him back from the edge of despair. In return, Duke had filled the silence of Ethan's life with loyalty, warmth, and a reminder that even in brokenness, love could take root again. Could he let that go now? Finally, the woman lifted her tear-streaked face, her hand still clinging to Duke's scruff. I'm sorry, she said softly to Ethan, her voice shaking. I should explain. My name is Margaret. Duke, he was mine. We lived by the river, out past the bend. When the waters rose, I barely escaped. I thought he was behind me, but her voice cracked, and she clutched him tighter. When I turned back, he was gone. I searched for days, weeks, but the river never gave him back. Until now. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. Margaret's story fit perfectly, every piece aligning with the mystery of Duke's past. And yet, his heart rebelled. Duke wasn't just Margaret's anymore. He had become Ethan's too. The old dog turned then, as if sensing the war inside Ethan. He moved from Margaret's arms to press against Ethan's legs, nuzzling his hand with wet fur. His eyes looked up, steady and full of knowing. Back and forth he went, leaning into Margaret's embrace before circling back to Ethan, torn between two worlds, two families, two halves of his life. Margaret wiped her eyes, her gaze flickering with both gratitude and hesitation. He loves you, she whispered. You've cared for him, haven't you? Ethan nodded once, words catching in his throat. He saved me, he admitted quietly, in ways I can't explain. The fire crackled, the only sound in the silence that followed. Margaret looked at Duke again, stroking the gray along his muzzle. Maybe, she said slowly, this isn't about who he belongs to. Maybe it's about what he needs here and now. Her voice steadied. He's old. He's been through enough loss. Maybe what matters is giving him peace, together. The suggestion hung between them, fragile and startling. Ethan felt the weight of it. Not a choice of one over the other, but a new kind of family, built around the dog who had survived the river's wrath. The days that followed proved the truth of Margaret's words. She visited often, bringing stories of Duke's puppyhood, of the games he used to play, of the loyalty he had shown all his life. Ethan listened, filling in the gaps of the dog's history with a quiet reverence. And always, Duke moved easily between them, curling beside Margaret with the comfort of long memory, then patting back to Ethan with the bond of their shared survival. The town noticed too. People spoke of the old shepherd as more than just a flood survivor now. He had become a living bridge between grief and healing, between past and present. Families who had lost everything came to stroke his fur, saying it gave them strength. Children whispered prayers into his ears. And always, Duke stood steady, receiving it all with the patience of one who had seen death and chosen life. Winter crept in slowly, the river frozen at its edges, the nights long and quiet. One evening, as snow dusted the world outside, Ethan sat by the fire with Margaret across from him. Between them, Duke lay on the rug, his head resting on his paws, the firelight soft on his graying coat. His breathing was slower now, each rise and fall deliberate, but peaceful. Margaret reached across, her hand brushing Ethan's. He's happy, she said simply. Ethan nodded, his eyes misting. He is. And in that stillness, Duke lifted his head one last time. His gaze moved between them both, old eyes filled with love, with gratitude, with a silent blessing. Then, with a long sigh, he rested again, as though finally content. Neither Margaret nor Ethan spoke. They simply reached down together, laying hands across his fur, feeling the steady warmth beneath. And in that moment, they understood. Duke's story wasn't just about survival, or loss, or even reunion. It was about love enduring through every storm, love that found a way to bind strangers together and leave them changed forever. When the fire dimmed and the night deepened, Duke slept soundly, safe in the home built by fate, in the hearts of those who refused to let him go. And the town would tell his story for years. The old dog washed away in the flood, who clung to debris, who found his way back, not just to one family, but to everyone who needed hope.